Live from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu and Kailey Leinz.
Iran strikes reach into a 10th straight night. But what's the impact on energy markets and on Democrats on Capitol Hill? Welcome to the Tuesday edition of Balance of Power. As oil prices rise on headlines today from Iran, Democrats are questioning the cost and strategy as they prepare to vote on government funding. I'm Joe Mathieu alongside Kailey Leinz in Washington. And Kailey, we're about to find out exactly how Democrats plan to weigh in on this.
Yeah, at least in the House. They're going to try to pass a rule this afternoon that would tee up a final floor vote on a number of different packages, including a must-pass defense authorization bill. Yes, a government funding stopgap, essentially a continuing resolution that would keep the lights on through the election into early December. And then, of course, there's the question of the budget blueprint for the Reconciliation 3.0 effort that would provide plenty more money to the Pentagon. It is very unlikely to get any Democratic votes. Of course, they wouldn't be needed. This is a partisan process when we consider reconciliation.
Exactly. And so Democrats are probably not going to be much of a helping hand. We'll get the latest on all of this in a little bit when we talk with Congressman Byron, the Republican from Florida, who's also running for governor, is going to be with us in studio here. There are questions about what exactly the speaker can get done with just about 48 hours left before everybody leaves town.
Yeah, of course, the Senate will be here a little bit longer before their August recess, and the Senate will be busy today as well as this afternoon. The Senate Appropriations Committee will be hearing testimony from the Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, and the chair of the Joint Chiefs, General Dan Kane, will be testifying about the money that they would like to see at the DOD, in part to fund the war effort with Iran. And safe to say, Joe, there could probably be some fireworks expected in that hearing.
I would expect that quite a bit. That's about 90 minutes away. We'll be talking about that quite a bit later on when we're on Capitol Hill for the late edition of Balance of Power. We're also taking you to the White House coming up. President had some new comments on Iran, not helping oil prices, but the stock market's just cranking today, Kailey.
Yeah, the president doesn't seem too eager to negotiate. He also issued a fresh warning to the Houthis, suggesting that if they do take action to cut off the Red Sea, the U.S. will take care of it. Not clear, though, what it means. All of that to say, though, oil prices are heading higher. We're north of $90 a barrel once again on Brent. So let's get a check on that and everything else moving in the markets today as we turn to Charlie Pellet up in New York.
Hi, thank you very much, Kailey Leinz. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all surging. You mentioned oil. Right now, Brent crude topping $91, $91.23 for a barrel of Brent, up 2.2%. West Texas Intermediate crude back above 85. Oil surging. WTI now up by 2.4%. Joe says the stock market is cranking. Indeed, that is the case. It is being led higher right now by semiconductors. Wall Street staging a big comeback today. Dip buyers coming into the market. They are scooping up those semi shares. The SOX, the Philadelphia Stock Exchange Semiconductor Index, up now by 5.5%. 30 members make up that index. They are all higher right now. Among the standouts, Micron up by 13.3%. Bottom line here, stocks higher. S&P up 68, 75.11 where we stand, up 0.9%. Dow Industrials up 496, up now by 1%. NASDAQ up 1.4%. The NASDAQ 100 index up 2%. And again, the SOX bears repeating, up now by 5.4%. The 10-year 4.62% with spot gold at 4,070 now, up 1.5%. Crude bears repeating, up 2.4% on WTI, 85.25 a barrel. Earnings news, General Motors shares, they're up 5.1%. It raised its full-year profit forecast by another $500 million after beating earnings estimates. So GM higher, Ford as well. Ford shares up 2.9%. Stellantis up by 1%. Utz brand shares soaring after the potato chip producer agreed to be taken private. Shares of Utz right now higher by 89%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcast. Joe and Kailey, that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
An 89% move on Utz. Thank you.
That's the hottest chip
Charlie
stock
Pellet.
on Wall Street, Kailey.
Yeah, different kind of chip.
Different
the chip you
chip
eat,
stock.
not the chip that helps.
It's a dumb joke.
Power AI. Although the other kind of chip stocks are doing well too. So
they actually are.
That's helping kind of lift equity markets overall today, and that's certainly what Wall Street is paying attention to. Meantime, here in Washington, of course, we are closely following the escalation that continues to escalate between the U.S. and Iran. As Joe mentioned, 10th day of strikes against Iran that the U.S. has conducted, and there is no sign that they will let up anytime soon. As President Trump in the Oval Office earlier, where he was joined for a bilateral meeting by the president of Lebanon, talked about the prospect of further degrading Iran's capabilities.
We are doing very well. We are degrading them at levels that nobody thought was possible. They're being degraded really so seriously. They did slip something through in Jordan, and if we had other operators, would not happened, unfortunately. But because we have the best equipment in the world.
President talking in the Oval Office earlier as we turn to Tyler Kendall, who's just outside on the North Lawn at the White House, Bloomberg's Washington correspondent. We had 10 straight nights of strikes, Tyler. Should we expect an 11th?
Well, at this point, Joe, President Trump is pointing toward escalation. We heard him earlier today in the Oval Office alongside the Lebanese president, saying that Iran desperately wants to meet, in his words, but that ultimately the U.S. doesn't want to come to the negotiating table unless Iran comes to the table in what he called a meaningful way. He added, quote, "We're not finished at all when it comes to Iran," and previewed that the U.S. could soon heavily hit what's known as Pickaxe Mountain. Amid this reporting from the Wall Street Journal that Israeli intelligence is pointing toward Iran moving thousands of uranium enrichment centrifuges into that mountain after last summer's bombing campaign by the U.S. This would, of course, point toward escalation, even as we are getting signals from mediators that they are working overtime at this point, trying to prevent any sort of further violence. Bloomberg News had confirmed earlier today that Iranian officials are in Pakistan for another round of potential talks, but we haven't really gotten public indications on what progress, if any, is being made, because at this point, Iran doesn't seem to be willing to let up its leverage when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz. Of course, the crux of the issue, why we are currently in this phase of the conflict. As overnight we saw Iran target another vessel in the Strait of Hormuz, this time linked to Kuwait. And then we also get these other threats when it comes to supply disruption. Joe and Kailey, as you mentioned on the top there, we have this renewed threat now from the Iranian-backed proxy group, the Houthis, against Saudi Arabia. And I'm sure you both saw, but new this morning, Bloomberg News was able to obtain this memo that shows that this threat of a maritime blockade isn't just against Saudi vessels, it is against any vessels going to or from Saudi Arabia's ports, which is a much wider zone, if you will, than what we had originally expected when we heard that threat yesterday.
Well, and of course, the president, when questioned about this by reporters, said if something like that happens, we'll take care of it. There is the question, though, Tyler, of the U.S.'s capacity to take care of a threat like that in the Red Sea while continuing to monitor and take action in the Strait of Hormuz, knowing that we're using a lot of munitions here, a lot of cost has been spent and not necessarily been replenished in terms of the Pentagon's coffers. That's the case that Pete Hegseth is going to be trying to make in testimony today. Do we know how long financially this White House and this Pentagon is able to continue this conduct in the Middle East?
Kailey, I think that's going to be the number one question that we end up hearing from lawmakers, particularly Democratic lawmakers, today at 2:30 p.m. Eastern, when Secretary Hegseth, alongside the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Dan Kane, testify. We got this statement previewing what we can expect in terms of the messaging from the Democratic members on this crucial appropriations committee, as these officials are asking for additional funding when it comes to the conflict in Iran. The statement from Senator Patty Murray, who sits on top of that committee, saying in part, quote, "The American people want to see a quick and strategic end to this war, not $70 billion of their tax dollars sent to keep it going." Now, of course, the administration has been arguing that there needs to be a replenishment of these stockpiles to keep their efforts alive when it comes to making sure that Iran will not be able to secure a nuclear weapon. I will point out that our own analysts at Bloomberg Economics, when they run the numbers, they say that one of the most expensive parts of the conflict is maintaining that U.S. naval blockade to be able to intercept or disable any ships that could be transiting to and from Iranian ports. But that, of course, has been absolutely essential in terms of squeezing that economic pressure on Iran as the conflict continues.
All right, Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall, live from the North Lawn of the White House. Thank you so much. And as we consider what lawmakers will ask and how Pete Hegseth will answer questions this afternoon and everything else that Congress is dealing with today, we turn to our political panel. Joining us now is Bloomberg politics contributor Jeanne Zaino, of course, a Democratic analyst and democracy visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center, joined today by Leslie Shedd, a Republican strategist and president of Rising Communications. Welcome to you both. Leslie, to begin with you on the Appropriations Committee hearing that not just Secretary Hegseth, but General Kaine will be appearing at as well. How difficult is their job trying to convince these lawmakers that the Pentagon needs more money for a war that many lawmakers still feel that they haven't been adequately briefed about or has been adequately justified to the American people?
Well, you have to keep in mind that ever since we introduced TV cameras into committee hearing rooms, a lot of what you see on TV is much more of a show rather than the conversations that are happening behind the scenes. So I think, yes, it's important that they, provide answers and have good answers. But I don't think that what you necessarily see on TV today will be the end all be all. And I would point out, my understanding is that the secretary came onto the Hill a little bit earlier and was briefing senators from both Republicans and Democrats about this ahead of time as well.
Which I'm sure would go a long way. That's one of the primary complaints that we hear from Democratic lawmakers. Someone come talk to us. Jeanne, how should this exercise be handled? Democrats have a lot of points to make, and they'll do so in the form of a question. But we also know this defense secretary has a knack for showing up with his own Oppo research. Is he going to have the binder with him?
I hope not, but I suspect he might. And let's just say that the questions being asked are serious and they're important. These are questions like, how much money has been spent so far and on what? How many of our servicemen and women have been injured? We have gotten numbers as to how many have been killed. How much damage has been done to American facilities and American interests overseas? This is information that we're not getting out of the Pentagon, that this defense secretary, or war secretary as likes to be called, has decided that he is going to cut the press out of the Pentagon. Why is that? Where is the transparency? You're coming before us for a REC 3.0 that's at $67 billion for the military. You're asking for $1.5 trillion for the next fiscal year. Where is this money going? And I'll tell you where it's not going. It's not going to win, because as much as we keep being told that the United States is obliterating Iran, that they have no navy, they have no ability to hit us, we are losing this war at this point. And the question is why? We spend more money than any other nation in the world in human history on our military, even before the 1.5 trillion. Why can't we take successfully on Iran? Those are the questions that are going to be asked. So, if he's going to turn to a logbook of, op research about a senator or a member of Congress, that's nothing I think the American people at this point care about. We need answers on a war that we are now stuck in because the president decided to enter it, and he did so without a strategy to win.
Well, and Leslie, when we consider that the supplemental funding request that Pete Hegseth is going to be defending was made before we launched new strikes on Iran that we've now seen for 10 days in a row, do you think it's likely that they're going to have to come back with another ask to Congress for more money at a later date? And if you had to put this money in a reconciliation package just to be able to get it through, can they realistically expect lawmakers to be able to deliver again?
I mean, I think there's always a chance of that, right? But I want to go back to something that was just said. We are not losing this war.
Are we winning it, though?
I think 100%. The military campaign is absolutely been won by the United States. We have decimated more than 90% of their military industrial base.
But they could still hit an air base in Jordan.
But that just requires that requires one or two operational systems. And this is coming from nonpartisan generals at the DOD that have repeatedly said we've decimated their Navy for a generation. We have significantly cut off their ability to provide funding to terror proxies. We have very seriously damaged and degraded their ballistic missile capability. So the United States military campaign has been incredibly successful in Iran. The problem that you've got is that it's really hard to get everything, as you said. And one or two missiles, one or two drones, one or two sea mines can shut down the entire Strait of Hormuz. And that is really what's happening. Iran is holding the entire world hostage right now by not allowing traffic to flow through the Strait of Hormuz. Not just the United States, countries everywhere. And now they are attacking other countries in the region. And this new attack that has come out now by the Houthis threatening to shut down the Red Sea, that impacts Saudi Arabia. It doesn't impact the United States of America. That is the Houthis at the behest of Iran declaring war on Saudi Arabia for no reason.
No, indeed, the closure of the strait is impacting some countries more than the United States. I think the critics who have at least joined us here on the air question the strategy. While it is a tactical military success, it has been a strategic challenge because Iran still has the keys to the strait. As long as they can shut it down, even with a speedboat, and can we say we're winning?
And I think the issue is, and the president has said this, right? I think he didn't realize, and even I would never have thought, that Iran would threaten the entire global economy by shutting down the Strait of Hormuz. It hurts them. It hurts everybody. It hurts people that they would need potentially to be on their side down the road. They have done nothing but alienate the entire world and make enemies. So yes, that is hurting us, absolutely, but that doesn't impact the military accomplishments that we've made. And I just want to make sure we're making a difference on that. As far as money goes, I think we'll see. It feels like we've been learning more about their capabilities, and I would hope that in response to that, we have found better ways to shoot down Shahed drones instead of using million-dollar missiles. I was just in Ukraine. There's a company there called Skyfall, and they have developed a drone that they can produce for $1,000 that can shoot down a Shahed. So there's a lot of technology out there, and I think some of this big, dollar amount that they're asking for is because they're wanting to do this once in a generation investment in the defense industrial base to bring in new technology and modernize the military.
Well, of course, to get any of that money to invest in the technology, once again, Jeanne, it's going to be an ask to Congress, not just for the supplemental funding, but the actual appropriations that the DoD has asked for, again, $1.5 trillion. You also need the Defense Authorization Act reauthorization to pass. And right now, it doesn't seem that Democrats are willing to offer votes for that. Where do you think this road ends? Can they hold firm so long as we're still actively engaged in conflict in the Middle East?
Yeah, I think that, my guess, and I wouldn't bet on this, Kailey, but my guess is that the NDA in the end, it probably does pass. I think we have already heard from Democrats who will not support it, but there has never been a moment in American history when we've had an NDA and it hasn't passed. So odds are this thing passes. But, I would just go back to something that Leslie said. While, she said she and Donald Trump didn't expect Iran to do this in the Strait. Well, I'll tell you who did. Every single person who ran a crisis simulation, every single president since the Iranian Revolution of the late 1970s. That was why president after president stayed away from a war of choice with Iran, because they have the ability to do this. And so I think it is deeply concerning if Donald Trump somehow missed that important bit of information, and maybe he's missing then some expertise on his team. The other thing that I think is important to say is that you can go to people like Maria Bartiromo on Fox News, who is, a friend of Donald Trump's by all accounts. She has been questioning, how is it we are spending this much American taxpayer money and we can't beat Iran? Because you know what? They haven't been beat. They have been holding their own. We tried an airstrike, that failed. We tried a naval blockade. We signed the MOU, that failed. And now we're back to this tit for tat. The president went into this without an imminent threat, and he went into it without a strategy for success. That's a big problem for him, but it's also a problem for us and the world economy. And so I do hope the NDAA passes. I think it will, but we've got bigger issues, which is, do we spend this much money for a military operation that hasn't been vetted by Congress? And apparently the administration has yet given us a strategy that they can win with.
Just about an hour away from that conversation, which ought to be a doozy of a hearing. We're going to press pause on the panel because they're coming back after we spend some time with Congressman Byron Donalds. He's going to be with us in studio here in just a moment. Jeanne, Zaino, Leslie Shedd will be back as well to reflect on what we talk about with the Congressman. First, we turn to Wall Street, where it's rally time for stocks and oil. Let's get to it with Charlie Pellet. He's at World Headquarters in New York. Charlie, how are we doing?
Right now, higher across the board. Yes, off session highs, but still substantial gains for the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ. All about chip stocks today. Wall Street staging a comeback as dip buyers emerging. We got a rally in chip stocks. The SOX, the Philadelphia Stock Exchange's semiconductor index, up now by 5.5%. Dow Industrials up 446 now, up 0.9. S&P also higher by 0.9%, but the NASDAQ 100 index rallying with those chip names, up now by 2%. And the SOX, as I mentioned, up 5.5%. 30 out of 30 members of that index are trading higher. The VIX just above 17, a 10-year 4.62%, 2-year 4.25%. Gold up $61 the ounce to $4,069, up 1.5%. And West Texas Intermediate crude surging again, stocks higher. Oil is rallying, WTI up 2.4%, 85.95 a barrel. Brent, the global benchmark, back above $91 now. Barrel of Brent up by 2.1%. Apple shares are gaining, all part of a broader tech rally, up by 0.5%. Apple preparing to introduce Apple Upgrade. It's a leasing program that will mark one of the biggest ever changes to how the company sells its devices. And Novo Nordisk is suing Eli Lilly, accusing its rival of misleading advertising as competition in the market for obesity drugs heats up further. Shares of Novo Nordisk, they are down 0.6%. Lilly higher by 1%. Recapping, the SOX is surging now by 5.5%. Oil is rallying, up 2.4% on WTI. S&P up 0.9. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcast. I'm Charlie Pellet. Joe and Kailey, that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, a busy day in financial markets. Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. And it's a busy day, a busy week on Capitol Hill, specifically in the House of Representatives, which is racing to get done a long list of things before they break for the August recess. And they're going to try to take that first step today by passing a rule. This is procedural to try to tee up votes on everything else. This is government funding. This is the National Defense Authorization we were just discussing with our political panel. And, of course, the budget resolution to try to get Reconciliation 3.0 across the finish line. Also should mention, fresh off a Charlie Pellet market check, stock trading ban for Congress is also included.
All in the next 24 to 48 hours.
Yeah, it's going to be a doozy.
So the Speaker has to defy gravity once again. Can he pull a rabbit out of the hat? We're lucky to have, as I mentioned, some time with the Congressman from Florida. Byron Donalds is with us, Republican representing the 19th Congressional District, and also happens to be a candidate for governor of the Sunshine State. Congressman, welcome. It's great to see you here in our bureau. Thanks for joining us on Bloomberg. Let's start with, we've been walking out on procedure all day today. Before we get to your race, does the Speaker have the votes for the CR? Are we about to get this done?
I believe so. I mean, look, at the end of the day, we know that the Democrats have been talking for about a month now about wanting to see another government shutdown right before the midterm. So think about this. The Democrats would rather shut down the government for political purposes because they have no solution. They have no policy. They're just trying to oppose the president at every turn. And they would shut down our government again just for the sake of getting more votes.
Are they telling you that behind the scenes? Because we ask Democrats every day, and they tell us they remember how bad the last one was, and they don't want to shut it down.
But come on, man. Like, they're going to tell you what their real plans are.
So, they are telling you.
Behind the scenes, this is what we're hearing. And so to get away from that kind of nonsense, let's just continue government funding until after the elections are over, and then we move from there.
Yeah.
Well, before we move to your election in particular, this budget reconciliation package, more than $90 billion of spending that is not offset by anything. Does that sit well with you?
Look, I think we have to do what we need to do for our military members right now, make sure that they have the funding that they need. Secondarily, I believe there's about $12 billion in funding in there for agriculture interests throughout the country. Florida is on that list. Back in February, Florida lost $3.5 billion worth of crops from the big Arctic freeze that moved through that early week of February. We lost $3.5 billion in crops. Florida is slated to receive some of those dollars. But it's also indicative indicative of what's happened to Washington, D.C. There is no talking to the Democrats. They don't want to talk about anything constructive, so then reconciliation becomes a vehicle of use in order to get things done for the American people.
We saw analysis from Bloomberg Intelligence about the farmers specifically. This $11 billion is believed to go to, in many cases, particularly for older farmers, to pay off debt. Do you think that we're going to have another round here for help for America's farmers if China doesn't start buying soybeans, or if we're not selling white corn across the border to the extent that we hope?
I don't think so, but I think it's important that we stabilize our farms here in the United States. In short, we don't want to be in a situation where we are importing products from overseas. We don't want to be in that position. So farming, agriculture is a bedrock foundation of our country. Any country, especially ours, we want to be able to feed our own people. And so what we're doing in Reconciliation 3.0 is to make sure that our farming community has the resources they need so we can still put American food on the table for the American people. And to be clear, this is to be something that the Democrats work with us on, and they refuse to.
So you want to make sure people are fed. People also want to guarantee that they're going to have access to water and access to things like power. Obviously an issue in Florida, specifically around data centers. The man you very well may be up against in November. Mr. Jolly has suggested that there should be a data center moratorium in the state of Florida, like we're now seeing in New York. You are arguing for a different approach, basically bring your own power. Is that the happy medium? How do you guarantee that that will protect ratepayers ultimately if data center demand keeps moving higher?
Well, a couple things. One, what they did in New York makes no sense at all. It's one of the reasons why capital writ large, not just around AI, but in any other industry, is leaving New York because they have stupid regulatory policy that doesn't allow for capital to flourish. We don't want to see that happen in the state of Florida. Number two, we already have on the books Senate Bill 484. Governor DeSantis just signed it into law. In our state, utility rates for Floridians will not go up because of a hyperscale data center. The other thing that's a part of that bill, you have to get a consumptive use permit from our water management districts who are expressly tasked with protecting Florida's aquifers in order for a data center to be constructed to make sure that they contain water usage to protect Florida's fresh water resources into the future. What I want to see happen on these data centers, if they're allowed to, if they come to Florida, build a closed-loop filtration system on site. So whatever water they do take initially, they recycle and clean that water and keep it self-contained on their property. And then the last thing, and I think a lot of Floridians are looking at this, proximity. Listen, I don't want to see a data center outside of my front door. I know Floridians don't want to see one outside of their front door. So making sure that they're away from residential areas just makes common sense. That's the way you do this. What Mr. Jolly is saying is that he needs to go study and have a moratorium in place so he can go study it. The truth is, if you have a governor who knows economics, who knows how to look at a building schematic, you don't need a year-long moratorium. You can make real decisions in real time that are in the best interest of Floridians while also making sure that if you do build one of these centers, that it can bring real economic impact in a positive way to the state of Florida. So these moratoriums, they sound good politically, but that's because it's a political answer instead of mitigating the issues that do come along with hyperscale data centers.
If your bill became law, and this story is really important to our audience at Bloomberg, we talk about it, Congressman, every day, and as we've traveled the country this midterm cycle, we've really been surprised at the level of NIMBYism that we're hearing. The data center has become a true political issue. If your bill becomes law, do you embrace data center for job growth, for economic growth? Is this the future of our economy?
Well, that's the wrong way to look at it. You have to look at what companies are already doing. Every company on the planet, every industry on the planet is already embracing AI. It's happening right now. The question is, do we have enough bandwidth to support all the uses? And this is where, from a national security perspective, the Trump administration is very clear. The Chinese do not want us to build out the infrastructure because the Chinese want to build that infrastructure. So all the data on the face of this earth is warehoused in China. I don't trust the Chinese. I don't want American data over there. I would rather us have common sense approaches like protecting ratepayers and protecting water resources here in the United States so that we actually make sure we warehouse our data. The other piece is that compute power is going to continue to expand in the United States. And so if you're a small business, and now you're having to pay more for compute power because we don't have the necessary infrastructure, who does that help? I'll do you one better. Any American who's using AI right now, and by the way, most Americans are, if you're doing a Google search today, that's now being run by Google Gemini, not the old search engine. If you're on Netflix and they recommend a show to you, that's AI. If you're in the Amazon Marketplace and they recommend a product to you, that's AI. And so AI is being used in ways that most people don't even see or understand. Right. So it's already here. The question is, are we going to have the necessary infrastructure in order to manage the compute power that is going to continue to grow? And what we're already seeing when we have the access to compute power with AI, it actually is demonstrating some positive impacts in our economy that are helping companies stabilize their income statement, stabilize their balance sheets, stabilize costs for end users. And I think that's what people truly do want to see happen.
Well, and you mentioned that there already is law in the books in Florida under Governor DeSantis. I would imagine you would like to see that continue. When we consider your potential governorship, though, how should we expect it to differ from the administration of Ron DeSantis?
I mean, a couple of things. One, law and order is still going to be the standard, like it has been under Governor DeSantis. Number two, we are going to have a limited government, low tax environment, low regulatory environment. We want to continue to have, frankly, the ecosystem where the Florida dream has been built upon. We're going to keep all that in place. Governor DeSantis has done a tremendous job leading our state. What comes next for the next governor is how do you balance the growth that has come to Florida with our environment, making sure we maintain conservation areas, we protect our waterways, we finish Everglades restoration, we provide fresh water, have a plan for fresh water into the future, even though people are coming to Florida because we are quickly becoming a major economic power, not just in the United States, but in the world. So how do you balance that? That's going to be the question for Florida's next governor. It's not a matter of differences from Ron DeSantis. It's how do you build on the successes that he's already brought? And this is where my career is unique. I spent 17 years in the financial industry, 4 years in the State House. I chaired the Insurance and Banking Subcommittee in the Florida House. You want to talk property and casualty insurance? I don't need talking points from anybody. I know the subject matter because I chaired that committee and I spent time in the business world, so I know that subject matter. The next governor has to know how to make the regulatory changes to impact affordability in our state while also planning for the state's future growth based upon the same common sense conservative principles that's made Florida the envy of the other 49 states.
You're going to have a debate in the Republican primary?
Probably not. I mean, those guys are still in single digits.
Yeah.
And if they, we released polling today. Our internal numbers have us at 53. Another public poll came out, had us at 44, I think it was. We had one come out last week, had us at 48. These candidates, they're still in single digits. So at this point, the Republican primary is going to be decided in 28 days. Why would I elevate you when you couldn't elevate yourself?
Just quickly, after this primary is over, do you expect Ron DeSantis will endorse you? Do you think he'll campaign with you ahead of November?
We'd love to have Governor DeSantis' endorsement and working with him and campaigning out there on the trail. I will tell you the thing I'm looking forward to is debating David Jolly. You were talking about debates. Yep. Those are the debates I'm looking forward to because then it's going to be about the contrast of vision for the future of our state. And I believe that Governor DeSantis completely agrees with us about the next steps for Florida. And so I look forward to having his endorsement and being out there on the campaign trail with him.
All right, Florida gubernatorial candidate and current Congressman from Florida, Byron Donalds, back with us on Bloomberg TV and radio. Thank you so much for joining us in our Washington, D.C. studio. And to react to the conversation we just had with the Congressman, we want to bring back in our political panel. Jeanne, Zaino, and Leslie Shedd are still with us. Jeanne, to begin with you, obviously, Congressman Donalds is very much looking forward to debating Mr. Jolly at some point. Of course, Jolly still maintains the Republican primary needs to finish up first. In a state like Florida, how close would you expect it to be between a Republican and a Democrat ultimately?
Yeah, I mean, I think the environment this year is better for Democrats than it has been, but I still think it's an uphill battle. And I thought it was fascinating, the discussion you had about the data centers. That is a huge, huge issue. It's a big issue in Florida. It's a big issue across the country. I'm hoping they debate and we hear more about that. The other thing I hope for Florida is we hear more about the cost of insurance, particularly housing insurance, which is a huge issue there. And then, of course, the economy overall, which impacts all of us.
What's your thought, Leslie, as the data center becomes a primary political issue? A year ago, I'm not sure you could have seen this one coming, but the spending has been so robust and it's impacting so many communities that I know Congressman Donalds is not one of them, but even some Republicans are worried about, for instance, rural areas being overtaken.
It's everywhere. And, you know, I am an advisor to the Republican Attorneys General Association. And this is something that is coming up in almost all of these races, this discussion about data sitters. The problem is we need them, right? As AI grows, and especially as we are able to develop more and more, you know, substantive quantum computing, we need data centers. So the question is, how are we going to be able to build them in a way that is responsible to communities, you know, and that doesn't make voters angry. And I think you're seeing that on both sides of the aisle right now.
Well, clearly, Congressman Donalds is against the notion of moratoriums. He thinks that New York made a bad decision. But would you be surprised to see that spread to other states, that idea of a moratorium, even to red ones?
You know, I have to tell you, in my limited experience with this, it doesn't really feel like a partisan issue right now to me. You hear some Democrats that are supportive, some Republicans, and then flip-flops on the other side, right? I haven't seen it really solidify as a Republican or red state versus blue state issue. I do think it is short-sighted to create a moratorium. I understand the concerns. I want to make sure that we are building these things, that we are building them in a respectful and an effective way. But the idea that somehow you can just say no data centers, it's just not realistic.
There's a lot of money at stake here. That's the big question, of course, Kailey, is about whether compute becomes commoditized and becomes a much cheaper thing without the need for such massive data centers. And it's going to take some time to answer those questions. Big thanks to our panel for swooping in after our conversation with the Congressman. Jeanne, Zaino, Bloomberg Politics contributor, our Democratic analyst, Leslie Shedd, Republican strategist, Rising Communications. We thank you both so much. We're going to turn back ahead to the war in Iran. We'll spend some time on the markets today, which are reacting, certainly in terms of energy. Crude oil prices, in both cases, WTI and Brent, have been up over 2% for the balance of the day. And Dana Stroul, a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East in the Biden administration, now at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, will join us as the president delivers new remarks about Iran following a 10th straight night of strikes. It's Balance of Power, only on Bloomberg TV and radio.
It's 1:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We're looking at a comeback for semis on Wall Street today with the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all advancing. Right now we have got the NASDAQ 100 index surging by 2%, keeping it all in context. The S&P up by 0.9%, the Dow advancing 0.8%, and NASDAQ up by 1.4%. All of this with the SOX surging 5.4%. Our Norah Mulinda will have a whole lot more on those semi-names for you coming up in just a moment. The VIX right around 17 now, with a 10-year at 4.62%. 2 years currently yielding 4.25%. Gold is up $60 the ounce to $4,068, up 1.5%. West Texas Intermediate crude rallying 2.5%. WTI back above $85 a barrel. WTI now at $85.31. Barrel of Brent crude just above 91, higher now by 2.2%. Charles Schwab shares, they are trading lower today after earnings. We've got Schwab now down by just about 0.5%. Company did top estimates. Retail investors continue to jump in and out of the market amid volatility sparked by geopolitical uncertainty. Speaking of trading, the London Stock Exchange is going to be opening a new venue called LSE 24 that will offer, quote, near continuous trading outside of its regular market hours. LSE 24 are going to operate from 5 p.m. until 7:50 a.m. in London and will initially offer exchange-traded products with equities as a possible next step. In New Jersey, officials say about 6,600 people who identified themselves as non-citizens were registered to vote between June of 2023 and June of 2024 due to a software error in the state's motor vehicle system. Recapping, S&P up by 0.9%. We've got the SOX up now by 5.4%. Joe and Kailey, that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you very much checking on the markets for us. And we want to talk more about what's happening in these markets because it is an update in equities, even though it is also an update for oil. This isn't necessarily a pattern, Joe, that always holds. Is sometimes the volatility, specifically the upward volatility in oil prices, can spook equity markets that are worried about the lasting impact of higher energy prices and ultimately on inflation. It's not the case today. Maybe you have the chip stocks to thank for it, but it is striking to see a rally like this underway in the stock market market, even as Brent crude once again is north of $90 a barrel. And potentially, if you listen to analysts like those at Goldman Sachs, has the power to go a lot higher in the not so distant future.
That was a nice note this morning.
Yeah.
120 maybe by the fourth quarter if this keeps cooking in Iran. Brent, by the way, now above $91. WTI is above 85, and it's not just that, Kailey. Interest rates are higher too. This would typically be an off day for stocks, but we're cranking right now. The poster child for the momentum trade, Micron, is up over $100 or 12%. We thought we'd look under the hood with Norah Mulinda to get a sense of what exactly is driving the psychology today. Bloomberg's markets correspondent live in New York. Norah, it's almost a buy everything, huh?
It feels that way, certainly. Looking at tech, of course, leading these major indexes higher. It feels as though we're sliding out of tech. We're getting back into it today. We are betting on the AI future, that is. But I've been talking to some sources on Wall Street today as we're really dissecting the moves that we're seeing in the market. And they're saying that essentially markets have been conditioned to fade any sort of geopolitical shocks. And when we think about oil rising and we think about the fact that we are still seeing this idea of whether or not there should be a disruption in the Middle East and how long that this will actually persist and last, we are seeing that playing out in the oil market when we do see oil rising, Brent crude higher, WTI higher. But if you take a look at the bond market, I'm also looking there. We see the 2-year Treasury yield. Yield's higher right now across the curve. We do see the 2-year Treasury yield, which we know tends to be very policy sensitive, attached to the Fed and the rate decisions that they are making. We're seeing it's sitting at about 4.25 right now %.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable to see the fact that rates in oil are moving higher, of course, with stocks moving higher as well. How much for this tech trade in particular, which obviously is having a good day today, Norah, is going to be decided by the mega earnings that we are going to get over the course of the next week? Where is the rally we are seeing now setting the bar?
Well, of course, the bar is pretty high. I mean, so far we've had a pretty solid start to earnings season. Of course, what we got out of bank earnings to start, very strong. And we've been seeing a lot of pretty strong reports so far. But everyone's really going to be focused on what we get out of some of these tech names. We know that Alphabet is reporting this week, Intel, Tesla. There's a lot of names that are on the radar of investors, and they're essentially going to be tracking to see how much more spending these companies are doing on the AI build out. What I've been hearing from some of my sources that I've been speaking with is it's just essentially whether or not they're going to be punished is all based on what type of spending and whether or not they're actually able to justify the spending as actually making sense when it comes to the AI build out.
All right, Bloomberg Markets correspondent Norah Mulinda, thank you so much, as always, for joining us as we consider the rally that we are seeing in stocks. And of course, as we mentioned, the upward pressure on oil, which has a lot to do with the escalation that we are seeing in the Middle East. 10 consecutive days of strikes that the U.S. have conducted against Iran, and it potentially is not going to wrap up anytime soon. President Trump was speaking in the Oval Office earlier today, joined by the president of Lebanon, who suggested that even if the U.S. were to leave Iran tomorrow, it would have been a big success. He went on to say, we're not leaving tomorrow, and went further to detail things that still potentially
You're talking
could
about the
get hit.
centrifuges.
Listen.
Yeah, it doesn't mean anything unless they have the material. They don't have. We follow the material. That's where the action is, and we'll be hitting that area probably pretty soon. And there's not a thing they can do about it. Normally I wouldn't say that. If I thought they could do something about it, I would never say that. But we'll be hitting that area pretty soon, and very heavily.
So potentially more heavy hits soon, in the words of the president. And it's on that note we turn now to Dana Stroul, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East under the Biden administration, now Research Director at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Dana, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. If we're potentially going to go after the areas in which these centrifuges are located, more heavy hits could be coming. We know, based on reports, that the president is considering targeting other infrastructure as well. Are we closer to the beginning of this renewed operation against Iran than we are to the end?
We're somewhere in the middle. So the big challenge right now is that neither the United States nor Iran look to be seeking any off-ramp for negotiations or diplomacy, even though they're both paying lip service to the idea that negotiations are still on the table. But the past 2 days of strikes have actually been expanding in scope and scale. way beyond just pure military targets. Both the United States in Iran expanding to electrical grids, railways, bridges, roads, etc., and the Iranians responding in kind across the Gulf, desalination plants, civilian hotels, other civilian infrastructure. So right now, the aperture of this war is really widening. Those strikes that President Trump is talking about would be a massive military operation with the kinds of assets we don't actually have in the Middle East right now. So it would be a really significant ramp up.
So you think, Dana, and it's good to have you back with us, that references to a 10-day ceasefire, maybe another round of indirect talks, this is all happy talk coming from both sides?
Right now, I think both sides are paying lip service to the notion of a ceasefire, and we do have the mediators, the Pakistanis and the Qataris, really trying to de-escalate because, as President Trump said earlier today, the United States can do this for days. They could do it for weeks even. The challenge is really the math on two other parts of this. The first is our partners across the Middle East. Do they have enough interceptors and defenses to protect their societies, their civilian infrastructure, their people against the onslaught of Iranian missile and drone attacks? And does the United States have enough munitions and missile defense interceptors to sustain what we're doing? And the second big factor here is the global economy, energy prices, et cetera, which are going up. And there, we're not only talking about the closures in the Strait of Hormuz, we now have those Iran-backed Houthis in Yemen threatening to impose a blockade on Saudi Arabia. And we also have the Ukrainians picking up their strikes against Russian oil refineries in Russia. All of that together is not great for the global economy, for energy prices, and especially for U.S. affordability right before midterms. So whose pain point comes first? The ones globally, the ones in the Middle East, or the Iranian pain point?
Well, Dana, you've said a few important things there. One, the suggestion that we need to be able to maintain our own defenses, let alone our Gulf allies be able to maintain their defenses too. But you also, in your previous answer, suggested that the kind of strikes the president may be alluding to would require assets that we do not currently have in the Middle East. Do we have access to all of the things we need? What would you be watching for to potentially be surged to this region to signal whether or not the president is serious about this?
What the president is talking about are reports that the Iranians have an underground enrichment facility under Pickaxe Mountain, which is inside Iran. So these are one of those deeply buried, hardened facilities under mountains. And it's going to look like what we saw last year in 2025 during the 12-day war, which was largely an Israeli military operation, and U.S. B-2 bombers came in with a very specific kind of heavy ordnance penetrator to penetrate deep underneath those mountains and destroy facilities. Pickaxe Mountain is a different piece of business. So those B-2s can come from the United States. We certainly have them in the U.S. military arsenal, but it's a different kind of operation.
It's a different kind of operation, and the president was trying to draw a line there, Dana, which is interesting. We've talked a lot about getting the highly enriched uranium out of the country. That would be its own type of operation with excavators and as many as 15,000 troops, we understand, plus force protection in the air. He's talking about empty centrifuges, which he says are not as big a deal. Would this be as sensitive an operation, or do you just have to blast it to smithereens?
First of all, whenever we're talking about these kinds of operations, they're incredibly serious. And what we know is that any military operation on its own is not going to completely eliminate Iran's nuclear program. We were told that it was eliminated last year. Of course, we're still talking about it this year. We know that a lot of it has been obliterated, but we have President Trump talking about nuclear dust. We could just watch this for a while. Certainly, U.S. ground forces going into Iran and removing all of that enriched uranium is a significant high casualty kind of operation. Whether he's talking about that one day or another airstrike on another day, either way, it's a serious piece of business. But what we're really fighting about right now is control over the Strait of Hormuz. And there, despite 10 days of consecutive U.S. military strikes, we know that the Iranians still have the will and the capability to continue to threaten freedom of navigation.
Well, so if it is a contest of wills and a contest of time, perhaps the president was asked, Dana, about this in the Oval Office, if he thinks Iran is specifically trying to use the Strait of Hormuz politically ahead of the midterms. The president said it wouldn't impact his decision making. He said it wouldn't impact me, but it is a question all the same. We were told yesterday on Balance of Power by retired General Ben Hodges that he thinks we could still be mired in this by the time November comes around. And I wonder if you agree.
I do. So the challenge with the Strait of Hormuz is that there was freedom of navigation and the free flow of commerce before this war. Historically, both Republican and Democratic administrations have focused on Iran's nuclear program, Iran's missile program, and Iran's cultivation of a terrorist network across the Middle East. And those were the reasons that President Trump said we were going to war in February, and this idea of collapsing the regime because the regime is committed to this strategy of destabilizing the entire Middle East. And now the surviving remnants of the Iranian regime have found a more potent instrument than the nuclear program, the missiles, or the terrorism, and that's being able to threaten or shut down freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz. And now that they've seen what leverage that provides them, it's hard to see them backing off or anyone ever returning to the status quo ante. So what this war has done is delivered us on the precipice of a new navigational order. Right now, it's whether Trump is going to concede that the Iranians get to control it, or whether the United States is going to be able to reimpose its will on the Strait of Hormuz. But when Trump talks about imposing tolls or service fees, that undermines this general premise of a global commons where there's free flow of commerce. Either way, this is just a terribly dangerous situation, and we're not going to have it resolved in a couple days or a couple weeks.
She's research director at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Dana Stroul, thank you so much, Dana, for joining us and sharing insights. It's backed up, what she's describing, by this report in the Washington Post today, Kailey. It's an intelligence assessment by the U.S. that shows Iran's government is unlikely to feel significant impact or soften its negotiating position as a result of new rounds of strikes.
It's incredible to consider as the strikes continue. Potentially, we could see another round tonight, yes. And I'm sure that Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, will be getting plenty of questions about this when his testimony begins in just about half an hour at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll be unpacking all of that for you in the 5 p.m. edition of Balance of Power. We'll be live from Capitol Hill, joined by Senators Rand Paul, Rick Scott, and Mark Warner. So don't miss that this afternoon on Bloomberg TV and radio.